Hello everyone and welcome to the Dyslexia Life Hack Show. I'm your host Matthew Head, and in this episode we're taking a look back at some of the episodes released in 2024. It's been an interesting year for the podcasts, and we've had guests ranging from CEOs, assistive technology company founders, MPs, former Olympians, as well as all things in between. I hope you enjoy this look back and look forward to seeing you in 2025, where we have some great guests lined up. Enjoy the show.
What I want to do now, rather than talking about horses all day.
I didn't expect to do that, but
horses are far too dangerous for me. That's why I ride motorcycles. But what I want to find out really is, when in your life did you find out about dyslexia in your journey when your dyslexia started?
Yeah. So I went through school thinking that I was just rubbish at languages, including English, but also all languages. And I was lucky because I'm okay at maths.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you know, there's lots of downsides to the English education system, but the advantage of A-levels being quite targeted is I could ditch anything that required more than a sentence.
Yes. Yeah.
So I did maths and physics and computing at A-level, and that allowed me to get to Oxford. But the number of people who come up to me and say, I felt I was stupid, or people just said I was lazy. And this is the importance of identification, right? Because then it's not just about getting the support you need, it's about your own view of yourself. I thought I was rubbish at languages. And I went to Oxford, but I'd applied to do politics, philosophy, and economics, which is essentially an essay-based subject.
Yeah, I can see the problem here.
Yeah, and why didn't I think of this? I'd done maths, physics, computing, and economics at A level. So I'd done the economics, which is quite mathsy, and it was essentially essay based. And I got to the end of the first term, and I'd got in because in those days you didn't need to do an exam to get into Oxford.
Did you not?
You could do it. You could elect to do it only by interview. So I had to do my A-levels, but there wasn't a specific exam. And I knew that if I did an exam for Oxford, I would not get in.
Yeah.
So I did the interview, and, I can talk the talk, and I've always been able to from a young age. And so I got in on my interview, and then they got, at the end of the first term, I remember it so clearly, my tutor, a wonderful man called Michael Hart, he said, he called me in at the end of term and he said, look, in our discussions, you're perfectly up to this, but your writing is terrible. And I'd also struggled because I couldn't read very quickly. So I'd had to read like the summaries of books rather than books. And he said, I think you're dyslexic. And he sent me off to the Oxford University's education department, where they had psych assessment. They confirmed that I was dyslexic. The gap between my written work and my oral language capability was off the charts. And then they gave me support and taught me how to read and write.
Okay. So what sort of support was there back then?
Well, I was taught to recognize words as pictures.
Yes.
And then to memorize the sound of the picture. So I read in pictures. And this is a fix that has worked for my life. I suppose these days you might be taught that through phonics and taught the phonic subsections of words, but I was taught it in terms of recognizing whole words. There's one major downside to this, which is when I come across a new word or a new name, it takes me forever because I have to basically memorize it.
Yes,
I have to get that into my head.
Yeah.
But it worked for me, and it worked well enough for me to then be able to write essays and get through it. But it's dogged me all my career. I mean, I've had some major screw ups. I went and worked for this. I went for work for a wonderful man who was the MP for Guildford. And he asked me to help him out in the 2001 election campaign. And I went and did that. And he'd written this long election address that needed to be sent to every household. And as when you're standing to be the MP, you get you can send one letter to every voter. That's part of the deal.
Yeah.
The Royal Mail do it for free. And he'd written this long thing, and I was publishing it. And this was before you had spell checker. And he had this lovely phrase, "I want to unite the community."
Yeah.
And so I thought you can see where this is going.
I can see this.
I pulled out this phrase and wrote it in large letters across the top of this leaflet.
So you're not doing it by half now?
No, and then we printed 40,000 of them.
Is that all?
Yeah, 42,000, I think. And then we sent them by Royal Mail to every household in the constituency.
Yeah.
And it was only when they landed from the Royal Mail that we opened it up, and in huge letters across the top of this, it said, "I want to untie the community."
Well, what I want to do is take you back to before business was a thing. Well, maybe not before business thing, but certainly scanning pens and stuff was a thing. And sort of get to understand when you sort of discovered you were dyslexic. I think I read some of your profile. You were a teenager at that point in life. How did that sort of come about?
Yeah, I really struggled at school. I was just struggled to learn. I struggled with reading. And anyway, my parents sent me for a dyslexia assessment when I was about 14 years old. And I was diagnosed with dyslexia. And actually, it was quite a watershed moment for me, really. I was really pleased. I know there's talk about, diagnosis and labeling and all that kind of stuff. But
yeah,
for me, it was a really great relief to get that assessment and therefore start getting some extra help and extra support in exams, extra time, extra accommodations. And those things made such a difference, actually. And looking back at, only in more recent years at my childhood, I remember walking into the classroom at the start of each week and they'd have the marks from the previous week's test on the wall. And I was never very tall. I would always be very close to the bottom of the list every time. And I think actually it was a reflection on, I always just assumed it was, my report said, it could do better. Jack could try harder. Jack could listen more, blah, blah, blah. But actually, I genuinely think that there was, at least in part, my dyslexia was holding me back from keeping up with my peer group. And so by getting those accommodations, it really levels the playing field. And, I couldn't recommend it enough to anyone who thinks that they've got a child or a student who might be dyslexic to get them screened and get them tested.
What do you think was the catalyst that got your parents thinking, actually, we need to get Jack through a dyslexia assessment? Because, some of them school reports that you sort of cited already, people can read that two ways, can't they? And you hear about adults who found out they were dyslexic in their sort of 30s and they're realizing, hang on, all this stuff makes sense now. But your parents clearly thought, well, actually, there's clearly some neurodiversity going on here. We should get Jack assessed.
Yeah, I will ask my mother that. Actually, it's quite a good question because my brother who's 10 years older than me is also dyslexic and was also diagnosed around the same time. So I guess they thought that there might be a link. I think it had already been talked about back in the 80s, early 90s that there was something hereditary about it. So I think that's what probably set them off. But I would like to know why how they went about getting my brother assessed, because that would have been in the early 80s probably, or mid 80s. And late 70s, early 80s. And that was quite, I think that was quite advanced to be getting assessed in your early teens at that age. So I'd like to know who suggested it to them. So thank you for raising that.
No problem. Yeah. In the 70s, early 80s, it wouldn't be necessarily the norm, would it? I find I'm quite rare to be assessed for dyslexia quite young, and that would have been like 1990, where I was about 6. So, let alone sort of a decade or so before that.
Yeah, I mean, my brother is coming up for his 60th birthday. So, and the British Dyslexia Association, I went to its 50th birthday celebrations just over a year ago. So,
yes, at Twickenham.
At Twickenham, yeah. So, British Dyslexia Association is not is all around that time as well. So very interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned you got sort of adjustments there. What sort of things changed for you in your schooling after you found out you were dyslexic and get the right things in place?
Well, I think both then and today, it's the fact you're teachers. So it's not just like the learning support person. All your teachers who teach you, whether it be English or maths or science, they would be informed of the fact that you have dyslexia and that you are possibly got a different learning profile, or you have got a different learning profile to the rest of the peer group. And as such, that needs to be respected and supported to a certain extent. So I would be interested to read the school reports in the following years, because I wonder if they still say could try harder, could do better. I wonder if the mood shifted perhaps in those reports to reflect the fact that it wasn't just all behavioural and my fault, and that actually it was just dyslexia playing its part.
Yes. Yeah, I used to find an interesting when we had a substitute teacher, they may or may not got the notes, and they're kind of like, what's going on here? Like, they're giving you stuff, and you're like, actually, I'm dyslexic. Oh! And then complete shift on how they were approaching the lesson happened. So,
you're right. It makes it more it makes the teaching faculty to be more inclusive and more open-minded, rather than just to think where every child is the same in their class, which I'm sure today people are a lot more open-minded on that fact. Anyway, you asked what kind of support did I get? I definitely got extra time. I got 20 minutes for every hour of GCSEs, which for me made a really big difference. I was really slow at processing, reading the information that was put in front of me. So having that extra time to reflect and plan and to write my answers, and it just kind of de-stressed the situation a bit too, because if you've got a bit more time, it allows you to not hurry as much as I probably would have done.
There's lots and lots we can talk about, but I thought one of the things we get started on really is your interest in anthropology before we get into the dyslexia stuff. So where did the sort of seed for that come from?
Wow. I've always wanted to be a writer, and I knew that I wouldn't be able to afford to be a writer.
Okay.
Something practical. So I decided to get a PhD in comparative literature. So that was like the closest thing. And I realized I didn't want to spend a career analyzing, deconstructing, and destroying literature.
Oh.
And then I was more interested in humans. And I thought, what would be an interesting way to prepare myself as a novelist and still get a PhD so that I can teach and earn a living? And I thought anthropology. And I just took a couple of anthropology classes and I liked them, but not until grad school. I only did one anthropology class as an undergrad, and it was a total turnoff. They showed a film of frat boys swallowing salamanders to talk about ritual, and I thought, ugh. I dropped the class the next day.
Yeah.
And I never. Actually, that's not true. I did one anthropology class because unlike you, I was horrible at math. I think I also had dyscalculia.
Okay.
And so I convinced my guidance counselor to let me take poverty and culture as an economics course. And I loved it. I interviewed homeless men in DuPont Circle in Washington, D.C. and hung out with them for a couple of days. And I just really enjoyed talking to people, and I preferred, now I realize that's kind of a dyslexia trait. I preferred getting information by chatting with people and observing, and, that's what a lot of anthropology is about. And I did it naturally, and I loved that. So that was kind of the beginning.
Oh, I see. And where does film and media tie into this then? Because when I read the three, I was like, hey, how does this all work together?
It's again, I guess I'm all over the place. I'm very visual. I went into Iran and started doing field work, and I've always been attracted to film and cinema and independent films. And I enjoy that as a medium for storytelling. And when I went to do my fieldwork in Iran as an anthropologist, I wrote into the proposal that I was going to take video because I was working on propaganda and how the government creates a nation state through visual arts. And I thought, I can't do that without showing it. And I think even in my writing, I'm just incredibly visual. And it was funny because when my son got diagnosed and we found out that it's hereditary and that there's this huge visual component to dyslexia, I thought, well, it's definitely my husband because he's a sculptor. And then it didn't occur to me that like, I do so much visual work and I think visually and I write visually. So I think it feels totally natural to me.
So is that where you found out you were dyslexic, is through your son's diagnosis and initially trying to point it towards your husband? And is he dyslexic too, or is he?
He is. We're both equally dyslexic. So my son turns out to be severely dyslexic, and you take two moderately dyslexic people and you put them together. Up with the severely dyslexic, but also incredibly, visual. He has all the strengths as well. So, yeah.
Is that one of the moments where you're he's going through the diagnosis and you hear things that he's doing, you're like, oh, I do that, and your husband's like, me too. Well, it's got
absolutely. Well, he's also extremely verbal, so he and I are very verbal people. We like to talk, we like to write, we like to read. We're really into literature. Just extremely verbal, very bad at math. And it was, by the age of 3, he was trying desperately to read. And I actually probably have stealth dyslexia because I more or less taught myself to read, kind of like Agatha Christie. I was an early reader. So it was under the radar for years. Terrible speller. I have other issues like word retrieval, which I can tell you about even now. So we got him tested pretty early because he was so frustrated. And we realized that there was something else going on. And he and I are both into poetry. And I thought, well, if you can rhyme, then you must not be dyslexic. So it's not that.
Right. Okay.
But then I started looking at things and I thought, I think it might be that. And maybe we should get him tested. And now I know that I think my father was definitely dyslexic. Okay. And he was also really visual. He always had a camera with him. He loved taking photographs. He ended up being a librarian, so also really into words. But but more like sat around and talked to the students in the library, rather than actually reading a book. I was writing poetry on the sly, very musical, but got through life because he was in Iran and from a very literate, kind of moderately wealthy family where he didn't really, he didn't suffer as much because he just kind of glide through. Though he did. I think it was difficult for him in different ways. But so I can definitely see the family line and the characteristics.
Is that something you delved into when obviously you found out you're dyslexic, you found out your son is, and then considering what you majored in and what you study, you're like, hang on, let's go and pull the rest of the lines in and see what goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I delved right in to the point where I was on one of the IEP meetings, where we did the individual education plan, which is just the most traumatic. And I ended up doing a ton of research so that I could go in there like, armed.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. You can know way more about these folks, about dyslexia, and it doesn't matter. You need a sheriff to come in and tell them to change things. I mean, it's just it's so, but it was funny because then I advocated for my nephew, who's also dyslexic in Washington, D.C. And the psychologist was like, Dr. Varzi, so where did you get your neurology PhD? And I was like, oh, actually, I don't have a PhD in neurology. And he was like, really? I was like, nope. So I went full force into, because it was so interesting to me to figure out how the brain worked. And having 3 people with dyslexia in the same family and having it be so very different in all 3 of us was also kind of fascinating to my anthropological brain.
I can imagine.
My husband's more like you. He's the engineer. He can, he's a sculptor also, and he can look at something and go like this and know exactly the measurement. And I can look at something and say, wait, was that inches or feet? Or so bad at numbers. And that's my son.
So let's get you onto dyslexia and sort of at what point in your life do you think you found out you were dyslexic?
I mean, I guess I always knew. The problem is, I was born in 1979. I'm 45. Dyslexia wasn't really a thing. You were just considered to be thick, right? And I did really well at primary school. I loved school, absolutely loved it. And then school typically changes from giving you awards for turning up and being happy and dressing well to start to score you for your education attainment. And I just wasn't very good. And I guess at that stage, I had convinced myself that I was stupid, because I was just being told that all the time. And then age 10, 11, you sit some tests to get to choose your secondary school. All my friends went off to the better secondary school in Bethnal Green. I went to the worst one. I got bullied terribly. I then became the bully. I then just opted out of school and never went, left school without even sitting a GCSE. It's not that I sat them and didn't get the qualifications. I didn't even sit one. I just wanted out of the system. I hated it. The education system had really let me down, and I just wanted to be a million miles away from it and get on with work. But it took me until I was 36 until I was brave enough to come out and tell people that I was dyslexic. So I got a diagnosis at age 36, and it's only been really the last 9 years that I've been brave enough to say, hey, I'm dyslexic. I need some help with this stuff.
Yeah. Wow, 36. What do you think kind of spurred you on to get the diagnosis at that age? Was there a particular event you're like, hang on, I do that?
Yeah, two things actually. I'd met my wife 2 years before, and my wife is dyslexic, but yet we come from very different backgrounds. My wife went to a fee-paying boarding school in Oxfordshire and left school, went on to university, got a high-grade degree from a reputable university, worked as an art buyer in the west part of London. And so that definitely was the start of me thinking, okay, so dyslexia doesn't necessarily equal low IQ or thickness. Maybe I could uncover myself and tell the truth. But then what happened is actually I sold my first business, age 36. I'd built a business for 12 years. I sold it for over 40 million quid. I owned it all. And I wondered, what am I going to do next? And I thought I'd done a 3-week executive education program at Stanford University during owning my business, and I loved it. So I decided after selling my business, I wanted to do an MBA, but I only wanted to do one with one of the best business schools in the country. So I wrote to Harvard, Stanford, and LBS, who were ranked in the top 5 for their executive MBA program. Harvard ignored me. Stanford responded. I did interviews with both, and LBS said to me, have you ever thought that you might be dyslexic? I said no, because I was no way I was going to break cover, right? I wanted to get on their course. I had written to them to say, wouldn't it be wonderful if one of the best business schools in the world accepted someone on their executive MBA program who didn't have a single GCSE? What great branding and marketing that would be. There was no way I was going to highlight it, but LBS asked if I would undertake a test. I undertook a test, and I thought, oh, that's it. I've been discovered, but they accepted me. So I was given what I already knew. I'm dyslexic. I was given a position on their executive MBA program, which I lasted all of 9 weeks, and then found it too difficult, obviously, and had to leave. But it was really those combined events, more my wife than the LBS part, that just thought, you know what? I'm going to tell the world that I'm dyslexic, and I've been hiding it because I had been living in this shell of who I really was. I was unable to be myself. I was unable to really explore what I was capable of. And I've achieved more in the 9 years that I've come out and told people about my dyslexia than I achieved in the 36 years prior. So I am a big advocate for giving people the confidence to say, I am dyslexic, and it really doesn't matter.
Yeah. I must admit, I found out in my life actually that starting a podcast and talking about dyslexic and actually just telling people that I am dyslexic myself, get more done after that. It's surprising how liberating it can be.
It's completely liberating. I sometimes refer to it what it must be like for a homosexual person who's just been in that closet for so long, waiting to just tell the world. And it's the same for people that are neurodiverse, and they hide in something. They're petrified of being found out. And then when they finally come out. It's this huge weight off your shoulders, and it makes you walk a couple of inches taller. It gives you the confidence that you just, I'm a confident chap anyway, but I gave myself a 15% boost that week, by saying, well, it's no longer a problem. But don't underplay it. It was easier for me. I had 40 million quid in the bank, and I had a beautiful wife that I was about to marry that was also dyslexic. It's a lot different for some people. And so I said a little while ago, it's really easy to find 75-year-old white men tell you that dyslexia is not a problem because look at them. Try being black with dyslexia. Try being an immigrant with dyslexia. Try being an Indian female where education matters so much to the family with dyslexia. Everybody has a different route into how they deal with dyslexia. So I'm not a fan of simply changing the message from deficit to superpower. I think dyslexia is an Achilles heel. It travels with you every day, and there's not a day that goes past that it doesn't have an element of a negative effect on my life.
Yeah. I think superpower things, I understand why people do it, but I do feel it's a little bit disingenuous. I mean, it's got strengths, but the strengths come with shadows.
Exactly, and it's not useful. Matt, it's not useful for us to say, what are we doing for the next generation if we simply say, dyslexia is a superpower, so carry on like the way you've been dealing with it for the last 50 years. It's really not useful because society hasn't dealt with it correctly. School systems haven't dealt with it correctly, both state and private school. My children are fortunate to be in a fee-paying school, and they are not much superior at dealing with it than the state school sector, in my opinion. So it affects everybody in so many different ways.
Yeah, and it's really interesting actually, because I remember having the same kind of doubts when I was at school with anything from coloured filters to whatever tool they were giving us. The iPads didn't exist then. But it's like, it's different, and I almost didn't want to be different, but right. I think your point there is very good, that actually you just need to get whatever gets the best out of you.
Yeah, and today, even audiobooks are really big for me. Back then there were audiobooks on cassette, and so you couldn't mark the space when you left off, and I would end up with my dexterity issues, I would end up breaking those tapes. The whole thing would fall apart. But audiobooks are great. I love those. Reader pens, I've found definitely advantages there. And then for me, and I know this doesn't work for everyone, but the dyslexia font is a real game changer for me. And I think it's important, as we talk about assistive technology and all these tools, it's really, there isn't one that fits everybody. It's really just playing around and figuring out what works for the individual. And for me, that font has been a game changer.
Yes. Yeah. I used to use it because Amazon Kindle supports it, which is really useful. I don't use it as much anymore, but I used to find it really useful at one point in time.
Yeah. I'm taking classes right now. I'm in grad school. And so it's super helpful for me as I'm getting through material.
Yes. The only thing you have to do is remember to flip the font back to a regular font when you get to submit your dissertation.
When you send an email. Very true.
Yeah, I used to send stuff in Comic Sans, so making that mistake.
I can relate to that.
Yeah. So you managed to convert your interest, which actually you do sport and you have dexterity issues. How does that work?
Yeah. So, the joke in my family when I was growing up was if somebody opened up the car door and tied my shoes and I got to the soccer field, I was fine as long as, all those things happened. But it hasn't been the easiest thing, but it's something that I really love. I love being around sport and in sport environment. And, now with my job, I'm, working in collegiate athletics, and it's been really cool to kind of allow what I'm passionate about and what I'm excited about on a daily basis to be what I get to do every day. I think when you're doing something that you love and you enjoy, you're able to kind of work through those mental struggles, those hard things that may not come easy, but you're willing to put in the work. And that's why in talking to young people, I always say, like, there's truly an advantage when you find what it is you enjoy doing. Because let's say reading is a challenge. I always talk to parents about this. This is my parent example, but if reading is a challenge for your kid, but they love playing video games, build the reading around the video game. Teach, like, make the video game the thing. And then, okay, I want you to read about the newest game coming out, or I want you to read about the newest machine. And then what you can even do, you can take it a step further. You can teach them how to budget. Okay, if you're going to buy a machine in the next year, how much do you need to say? You can teach them through what they really enjoy doing because they've already had a vested interest.
Yes, the Trojan horse almost, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it really works. And so the trick is find out what they're interested in first. Find out what they enjoy doing first, and then worry about the other things. Like, make the other things the secondary.
Yes, yeah, definitely. I know when I was a kid, I could read motorbike magazines all day long, but reading the English literature stuff was never going to happen.
Totally.
So you do a lot of work with youngsters through sporting as well as outside of that. So how are you finding the work with neurodiversity, and are you linking some of the work you do with sport into it?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I'm connected with the International Dyslexia Association. We have the Oregon branch back home. I've actually connected to the branch out here in Austin as well. So I do try to keep those community efforts established. And then I also, being at the university level, you're seeing all sorts of students. So it does definitely apply. And I haven't fully, figured out how it all will work together, but it's definitely, there's some crossover for sure.
Remember, if you do enjoy the show, to follow it on your favorite podcast platforms and even put a review if you have time. That leaves me to thank you very much for listening, and I will speak to you in the next episode. Goodbye for now.